I knew something was wrong the moment Marcus set his coffee cup down without drinking from it. We'd been married 11 years, and I'd memorized his patterns, the way he always took 3 sips before speaking in the morning, the slight nod he gave when he'd made a decision. But that Tuesday, his hand just hovered over the handle, trembling slightly. And when he finally looked at me, his eyes had that careful flatness people get when they're trying not to explode. He slid a folder across our kitchen table. The label read, Network Forensics Report in that generic corporate font that means someone paid good money for official-looking documentation. Naomi, he said, and I heard the formality in his voice, the distance. Can you explain this? I opened the folder. Inside was an IP trace report, the kind I'd seen 1,000 times in my work as a fraud detection engineer. Except this one was tracking something I'd supposedly done. Anonymous tips sent to Marcus's email, to his mother's phone, to the family lawyer's office. Tips about me, about gambling addiction, financial irresponsibility, erratic behavior, each one carefully documented with timestamps and source data. Every single message had originated from the same IP address in Scottsdale, Arizona, Denise's home Wi-Fi router. My sister-in-law had been manufacturing evidence against me, and whoever she'd hired to do it hadn't bothered to use a VPN. I looked up at Marcus, and for a moment I almost told him everything I was seeing. The amateur mistake, the obvious pattern, the fact that this was fraud detection 101. But something made me stop. The careful way he was watching me. The fact that he'd brought this to me like evidence in a trial rather than confusion between spouses. He'd already decided I was guilty. He just wanted to see how I'd lie about it. So instead, I said, I see it, and closed the folder and took a sip of my own coffee even though my hands wanted to shake, and I thought about the foster homes I'd lived in before Grandma claimed me at 12. All those places where I learned that defending yourself too hard just makes people more certain you're guilty. That's all you're going to say? Marcus asked. What would you like me to say? The truth would be nice. I wanted to laugh. The truth was that his sister had been systematically destroying my reputation for reasons I didn't yet understand, using techniques so clumsy that any first-year fraud analyst would catch them. The truth was that I could dismantle her entire operation in about 45 minutes with the right access and a decent cup of coffee. The truth was that my husband had apparently received multiple anonymous messages claiming I was a degenerate gambler, and his first instinct wasn't to ask me about it. It was to hire someone to prove it. But I just said, I don't gamble, Marcus. I never have. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something. Then he left for work without kissing me goodbye. That's when I knew I was in real trouble. The thing about being raised in foster care is that you develop a specific kind of radar for institutional threats. You learn to spot the caseworker who's already written their report before the home visit, the teacher who's decided you're a problem before you open your mouth, the family member who smiles at you while calculating how to make you disappear. I'd felt that radar pinging around Denise since the day Marcus introduced us, but I'd convinced myself it was my own insecurity, my imposter syndrome, my fear that I didn't really belong in this family, with their generational wealth and their historic funeral home business, and their name that opened doors I'd spent my whole life trying to pick the locks on. I'd been wrong to ignore it. Over the next 3 weeks, I started paying attention to things I'd previously explained away. The calls to Child Protective Services claiming I left our 8-year-old son Xavier home alone, 2 surprise visits in 1 month, both times when I'd been at work, and Marcus had been the one doing pickup. The story Denise told at the family reunion about hearing from a reliable source that I'd been fired from my previous job for embezzlement. The way Marcus's mother had started asking pointed questions about my spending habits, my stress levels, whether I was sleeping okay. Someone was building a case against me, piece by careful piece. Then Marcus showed me the text messages. He came home early on a Thursday, and I knew from his face that something had escalated. He sat down across from me at the dining room table, the same table where we'd planned Xavier's birthday parties and argued about whether to refinish the hardwood floors and made love on a Sunday morning when our son was at his grandmother's. And he opened his phone with the deliberate care of someone handling evidence. "Who's Jamal?" he asked. I didn't know anyone named Jamal. But when Marcus turned his screen toward me, I saw a thread of text messages supposedly between me and someone with that name, discussing meeting times and locations, making references to Xavier's school schedule that only someone close to our family would know. The messages were detailed, intimate, damning. They were also completely fabricated. I could see the telltale signs, the slight inconsistency in timestamp formatting, the fact that certain phrases repeated in ways real conversation doesn't, the metadata artifacts that suggested these had been generated rather than genuinely exchanged. Someone had used a spoofing service, probably the same one that created those poker site transactions, and they'd done a decent job, decent enough to fool someone who wasn't looking for it. But I'd spent 15 years building fraud detection algorithms. I didn't just look for it. I saw it the way other people see their own reflection. "These aren't real," I said. "They came from your number, Naomi. Numbers can be spoofed. Messages can be fabricated. Marcus, this is literally what I do for a living. I can show you exactly how someone would—" "No." He held up his hand. "I don't want another explanation. I just want the truth." There it was again, that word, truth, like I was the one bending reality. And that's when I understood what was really happening. Denise wasn't just trying to make me look bad. She was trying to make me look crazy. Because a woman who's unstable, who gambles, who cheats, who neglects her child, that woman doesn't deserve to inherit anything. That woman doesn't belong in this family. That woman gets written out of the will. I thought about the trust fund Marcus's father had left us, $2.8 million in commercial property, jointly owned, specifically structured so that neither Marcus nor I could be cut out without the other's consent. I thought about the quarterly trust meetings where Denise, as executor, controlled the distribution. I thought about the clause in the original will that our lawyer had mentioned once, the one that allowed the executor to contest a beneficiary's fitness under extraordinary circumstances. I thought about the fact that the annual trust distribution was 8 weeks away, and I realized I was watching someone try to steal my inheritance by destroying my credibility so thoroughly that even my own husband would agree I shouldn't have it. The question was, how much time I had before she succeeded. If you've ever had someone manufacture a version of you that everyone believed because the lie was easier than defending you. You know this specific feeling, like you're screaming underwater while everyone on shore nods along to a story about who you are that you've never even met. Drop a comment if you want to know what happened when I stopped defending and started hunting. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I went into my home office and did what I should have done the moment I saw that IP trace report. I stopped trying to prove I wasn't guilty. I started trying to prove who was. The poker site transaction records were first. I'd seen them before. Marcus had shown them to me 2 weeks earlier, printouts of supposed wire transfers from our joint account to an online gambling platform. The transaction IDs looked legitimate, the amounts were plausible, the dates corresponded to times when I'd been traveling for work. On the surface, they were convincing. But I didn't look at surfaces anymore. I looked at structures. I pulled up the records on my own system and started running them through the same pattern recognition software we used at the credit union. Within 20 minutes, I had my answer. The transactions had been generated using a specific fraud template, one that a former colleague of mine named Richard Chen had actually patented 3 years ago after he left to start his own identity verification company. The template had a unique signature in how it structured metadata, a quirk that made it identifiable to anyone who knew what to look for. Someone had paid for professional forgery services, someone with enough money to hire Richard's company, or someone who'd bought access to his proprietary tools on the dark web. I traced the Bitcoin payment. It took me until 3 in the morning, following the wallet through 4 different exchanges, but I finally found it. The original purchase had been made using an email address registered to Denise's nonprofit organization, the Heritage Foundation, a charity supposedly dedicated to preserving Black Atlanta's historic institutions. The same nonprofit where Denise served as executive director, managing an annual budget of over $1 million in donor funds. She'd used charity money to buy the tools to frame me. I sat back in my chair and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger yet, that would come later. This was colder, clearer. This was the feeling I got at work when a pattern finally clicked, when the fraud ring revealed itself, when I could see the entire operation laid out like a blueprint. Denise had been planning this for a long time, and she'd made one critical mistake. She'd assumed I wouldn't know how to look. The next morning, I called Gerald Hayes. He was a retired Secret Service agent who'd moved into private digital forensics consultation after putting in his 30 years. We'd worked together on a multi-state credit card fraud case 2 years earlier, and I'd learned that Gerald had a specific talent for finding things people thought they'd hidden permanently. "Naomi Washington," he said when he answered. "Haven't heard from you since the Denver case. What's going on?" I told him everything. The anonymous tips, the fabricated medical records Denise had presented to Marcus, showing I'd supposedly sought treatment for opioid dependency at a clinic in Macon, the text messages from Jamal, the poker site transactions, the pattern of escalation leading up to the trust distribution deadline. I sent him everything I had: the IP trace report, the Bitcoin wallet information, the spoofed messages, scans of the medical records. He called me back 4 hours later. "Mrs. Washington," he said, and something in his voice made me put down the sandwich I'd been pretending to eat. "What I'm about to show you will end your sister-in-law's life as she knows it." He walked me through what he'd found. The medical records used a physician's DEA number that had been deactivated in 2019 after a Medicare fraud conviction. The therapist's signature was lifted from a completely different document, a letter of recommendation for a graduate student that was still publicly available on a university website. The clinic letterhead had the wrong address. The real facility had moved 3 years ago. Whoever created these documents hadn't expected anyone to actually verify them, but that wasn't the worst part. Gerald had found Denise's Dropbox account. I don't know how he did it, and I didn't ask. But inside that Dropbox were folders labeled with dates going back 4 years, 6 months after Marcus's father had announced his revised will, the one that gave Marcus and me joint ownership of the commercial properties, instead of leaving everything to Marcus alone. 4 years of planning. 4 years of collected documents, drafted emails, practice runs of the stories she'd tell. There were templates for the anonymous tips, research on gambling addiction symptoms, notes about which family members would be most susceptible to which narratives. There were even drafts of forged restraining orders against me, backdated to create a pattern of instability, documents that had never actually been filed but existed as insurance in case she needed to escalate further. And there were the Facebook messages, private messages to her college sorority sisters, sent over the course of 18 months. In one, she wrote, "Daddy always said that girl would never really be family, and when this is done, Marcus will finally see what we all saw from day one. That foster kid is going right back where she came from." In another, "The trust distribution is in 6 weeks. I just need to make sure Marcus asks her to move out before then. Once she's out of the house, I can contest her fitness as co-beneficiary, and we can restructure the whole thing." And in the most recent one, sent 3 days ago, "Mother is finally on board. She called Naomi that woman yesterday instead of using her name. We're almost there." I read them sitting at my desk at the credit union, door closed, hands perfectly steady. I read them twice. Then I forwarded everything to my personal email, created an encrypted backup, and went home to have dinner with my husband and son like nothing had changed. Because everything had changed, but Marcus couldn't know that yet. The masquerade started that night and lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of smiling at Denise at family dinners while knowing she'd spent 4 years trying to erase me. 3 weeks of listening to Marcus's mother make passive-aggressive comments about family values, while I knew she'd agreed to call me that woman, like I was a stranger in their house. 3 weeks of watching Denise hold Xavier's hand and compliment his report card, while I knew she'd called CPS twice to have him taken away from me. The hardest part wasn't the lying. I'd learned to lie in foster care, little survival lies, strategic truths, the art of becoming whatever the current placement needed you to be. The hardest part was the physical cost of knowing. My jaw ached from clenching it in my sleep. My hands developed a tremor I had to concentrate to control. Food tasted like cardboard. I lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks because my body had decided we were in a different kind of survival mode now, one where eating was optional and hypervigilance was mandatory. Marcus noticed. Of course he noticed. "You seem tense," he said one night after dinner, watching me load the dishwasher with mechanical precision. Work is busy, I said, which was true. Work was busy because I was also running a covert investigation into my sister-in-law's 4-year conspiracy to destroy my life, but I didn't mention that part. Denise asked if you wanted to go to lunch next week, he continued. Just you and her. She said you two haven't spent much time together lately, and she wants to clear the air about some things. I felt my chest tighten, that specific breathless panic of knowing you're being tested and knowing you have to pass. Denise was probing. She'd sensed something different in the way I'd looked at her at Sunday dinner, or maybe she'd noticed I hadn't defended myself as vigorously against the latest accusation, and now she wanted to get me alone to see what I knew. That sounds nice, I said, and smiled at Marcus like I meant it and felt something crack a little deeper in my chest. I didn't go to lunch with Denise. I told her I'd come down with a stomach bug. Instead, I went to lunch with Gerald Hayes and a lawyer named Patricia Morris who specialized in trust litigation. Patricia looked at the evidence I'd compiled, the Bitcoin trace, the forged medical records, the Dropbox files, the Facebook messages, and said something I'll never forget. Mrs. Washington, I've been practicing trust law for 23 years. I've seen families destroy each other over money, over property, over grudges that started before anyone can remember why. But I have never seen someone document their own conspiracy this thoroughly. Your sister-in-law created an evidence file against herself. So what do? I asked. You decide what kind of justice you want. We can file a civil suit, pursue criminal charges for fraud and forgery, report her to the Nonprofit Regulatory Board. We can dismantle this privately or publicly. But understand, once you start this, there's no taking it back. The family will fracture, your marriage might not survive it, your son will grow up knowing his aunt tried to destroy his mother. And if I do nothing? She wins. You lose the trust inheritance, probably your marriage, possibly custody of your son depending on how far she wants to push the fitness challenge. And 4 years from now, she'll do this to someone else who gets in her way. I thought about the grandmother who'd claimed me from foster care when I was 12, who'd looked at a damaged kid nobody else wanted and said, "That's my granddaughter," like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I thought about what she used to say when I'd come home crying because the kids at my new school treated me like I didn't belong. "Baby," she'd said, "blood makes relatives, but loyalty makes family, and some bloodlines are just poison dressed in Sunday clothes." I want her to confess in front of everyone, I said. I want them all to see exactly who she is. Patricia smiled. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget. The Washington family held an annual memorial service for Marcus's father every October at the historic funeral home he'd built into an Atlanta institution. 47 people attended this year. Family members, business associates, community leaders, the mayor, 2 state representatives. Denise had organized the entire event as she did every year, turning it into a showcase for her nonprofit and her role as keeper of her father's legacy. She'd chosen her outfit carefully. I watched her that morning, standing at the front of the chapel in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, wearing the same pearl necklace she'd given me at my bridal shower. The real one, not the costume jewelry fake she'd given me to make sure I'd never truly belong. Her makeup was perfect. Her smile was warm. She looked like exactly what she'd spent her whole life becoming. Atlanta royalty, untouchable and beloved. When she stood up to speak about her father's legacy of integrity, I waited until she was 3 sentences in. Then I stood up and asked Pastor Williams if I might share a brief testimony instead. The room went quiet. Marcus's hand tightened on my wrist, not pulling me down, just holding on, like he wasn't sure what was happening but knew it was something. "Of course, Sister Washington," Pastor Williams said, and I heard the uncertainty in his voice, but he stepped aside because this was a church and you don't refuse someone's testimony in a church. I walked to the front. I'd brought my laptop. Gerald had helped me set it up earlier, connecting it to the funeral home's projection system and speaker setup. The screen behind me was the same one they used to show photos of the deceased during services, a 12-foot display that dominated the chapel wall. "I want to talk about truth," I said, and my voice was steady, clear, the voice of someone who'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this exact moment. About what it cost to find it, about what it cost to tell it. I pressed play. The screen behind me lit up with the IP trace report, every anonymous tip highlighted, every message shown with its timestamp and source location. I narrated as the images changed, explaining in simple terms what IP addresses meant, what it proved about who sent the messages, why someone would need to fabricate evidence this carefully. Then came the Bitcoin wallet trace, the poker site forgery, the medical records with the deactivated DEA number, the Dropbox files showing 4 years of planning, and then came the Facebook messages. Denise's voice played through the funeral home's speaker system, reading her own words aloud in audio form. Gerald had used voice synthesis to make them sound exactly like her. Every message displayed on screen, while her synthetic voice filled the chapel. Daddy always said that girl would never really be family, and when this is done, Marcus will finally see what we all saw from day one. That foster kid is going right back where she came from. I watched the room change, watched faces shift from confusion to understanding to horror, watched Denise's carefully constructed mask crack and crumble, watched Marcus's mother put her hand over her mouth, watched the mayor lean forward in his pew like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Watched Denise try to speak and find she had no words left. "Your father," I said, looking directly at her, "left Marcus and me a joint inheritance because he believed marriage meant partnership. You spent 4 years trying to make me unfit to receive it because you never believed I deserved to be part of this family. You used donor funds from your nonprofit to pay for professional forgery services. You filed false reports with Child Protective Services. You manufactured evidence of crimes I never committed, addictions I never had, affairs I never pursued." I paused. Let the silence build. "And you documented everything, every plan, every lie, every moment of contempt. You kept it all in a Dropbox file like a trophy collection." Denise finally found her voice. "You hacked my private files. You violated—" "I didn't hack anything," I said. "A licensed digital forensics investigator examined evidence of fraud and forgery. Everything you're seeing on this screen will be provided to the Georgia Attorney General this afternoon, along with a formal complaint about misuse of nonprofit funds. The IRS will receive their copy tomorrow." The room erupted. People standing, shouting, questioning. Denise trying to speak over them, her voice getting higher and more desperate. Marcus staring at me like he'd never seen me before, which was probably true in a way. He'd never seen the version of me that stopped asking to be believed and started building proof instead. Pastor Williams called for order, but nobody was listening anymore. I picked up my laptop, walked back to my seat, and sat down next to my son. Xavier looked up at me with his father's eyes and said, "Mom, what just happened?" "The truth," I told him, "just the truth. The Georgia Attorney General opened an investigation the following week. The Heritage Foundation's board demanded Denise's resignation within 48 hours. 7 board members quit when she refused, and the remaining 4 voted to remove her anyway. The audit revealed she'd used nearly $40,000 in donor funds over 4 years to pay for the forgery services, the private investigator she'd hired to follow me, and the spoofing software. Her husband filed for divorce 3 weeks later, citing fraud and irreconcilable differences. Her mother, Marcus's mother, changed the locks on the family estate after she read the full collection of Facebook messages, including the ones where Denise called her a senile old woman who needs to die already so I can fix this family. Marcus and I went to counseling. We're still going. Some days are better than others. He asks me sometimes why I didn't tell him earlier, why I let it go on so long, why I didn't just show him the evidence the moment I found it. I tell him the truth, because I needed him to see it the way everyone else would see it, in context, undeniable, impossible to explain away or minimize. Because if I'd shown him in private, he might have found a way to protect his sister, to make excuses, to convince himself I'd misunderstood or exaggerated, because I needed the truth to be so overwhelming that there was no room left for doubt. He doesn't always like that answer, but he's learning to live with it. The first Sunday I attended church alone without looking over my shoulder, Xavier held my hand as we walked into the sanctuary. The same church where I'd stood in front of 47 people and played a recording of my sister-in-law's contempt on a screen meant for memorial photos. Some people still stared, some people still whispered, but nobody questioned whether I belonged anymore. That's the thing about proving the truth. Once you do it, once you make it undeniable, you don't have to keep proving it. The truth does its own work after that. I think about my grandmother sometimes, about what she said about blood and loyalty and poison dressed in Sunday clothes. She was right. Marcus's father built something real with his funeral home business, with his careful estate planning, with his insistence that his son's wife be treated as a full partner. But his daughter took that legacy and weaponized it, turned family structure into a battlefield, used inheritance as a prize, worth destroying someone to claim. Research shows that financial elder abuse and inheritance theft cost American families an estimated $3 billion annually, with 90% of cases perpetrated by family members who have access to estate documents and trusted relationships with the victims. What Denise did to me, the systematic reputation destruction, the forged documents, the manufactured evidence of unfitness, follows a pattern that appears in trust litigation cases nationwide. The Georgia Bar Association reports that contested inheritance cases have increased by 34% in the last decade, with fraud allegations appearing in nearly half of all disputes. The difference in my case was that I had the skills to detect what she was doing and the patience to document it before responding. Most people don't. Most people get erased from family wealth the way Denise intended to erase me, quietly with just enough manufactured evidence to make the exclusion seem justified. If you're listening from your car during your commute, from your kitchen while making dinner, from wherever you are right now, I want you to know something. If someone has ever manufactured a version of you that everyone believed because the lie was easier than defending you, you know the specific loneliness of watching people choose the comfortable fiction. Tell me in the comments what it cost you to prove who you really were. Tell me if you're still fighting to be seen, or if you've already won, or if you're somewhere in between like I am. And if you're currently living with the knowledge that someone close to you is building a case against you, collecting evidence that doesn't exist, creating a narrative that will destroy you, start documenting now. Not defensively, not emotionally, methodically. Build your own case file. Find your own Gerald Hayes. Because the truth doesn't defend itself. You have to build it, piece by piece, until it's so solid that nobody can argue with it anymore. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who fought back against family betrayal and won. Comment with where you're listening from. Hit the like button if you believe some bloodlines are just poison dressed in Sunday clothes. And remember, sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep.